in labor, and locked in a cell. Rihanna Cleary's repeated pleas for help were ignored. She gave birth alone, forced to cut the umbilical cord with her teeth.
On September 27, 2019, alone in her cell at HMP Bronzefield, Rihanna Cleary gave birth without help. Hours later, her daughter, Aisha, was dead. But Rihanna isn't alone in her suffering. This is what happens to pregnant women in prison.
A lot of people don't really know what shackling is. This is shackling. The person in my drawing doesn't have a face because it would be too many faces to put there.
2008, Pamela Wynn was 6 weeks pregnant in a federal detention center in Georgia when she stepped into a van bound for court. Her ankles shackled, her wrists chained to her waist, and her belly was pressed tight against the metal. She was 39, a former surgical nurse, and charged with a white-collar crime, now reduced to an inmate number 54458-019. And that day she fell. The shackles were digging into her skin. She tried to climb up, but the pain made her stumble. Guards picked her up, but no one checked if she was okay. They didn't even ask. And back in her cell that night, she noticed that she was bleeding. At first, there were just a few streaks, but Pamela was a nurse, and she had worked with women's health for years. She knew what spotting could mean, especially after a fall. She filled out medical requests, one after another. Days passed, and then weeks, but there was no response. Finally, someone took her seriously. She was moved to the facility's medical unit, but she was shocked to find it wasn't properly equipped, nor built for women, let alone pregnant ones. The staff had admitted as much. The director told her,
"We weren't designed to care for pregnant women. There's nothing we can do."
Everything in the prison is set up for the men. The prison was created for the men.
It took nearly 3 months for her to get clearance to see a specialist. And when she did, the obstetrician had no ultrasound machine. So she fills out another request, waited again. But by then, it's already too late. One night, at around 10 p.m., the facility's on lockdown. And Pamela hadn't drank anything all day. The water from the tap ran brown. And the only other option was an artificial red drink served with meals. And she didn't trust it, not for a pregnancy. She started cramping, but she initially thought it was dehydration and tried to sleep it off. Now the pain got worse, and when she woke up, she knew she was in labor. There was no call button, no way of alerting anyone. This cell is dark, and her cellmate is screaming for help, banging on the door. Time crawled by, and Pamela just lay there, curled up in pain, trying to keep her legs pressed shut, hoping someone would come soon. It took over 4 hours. When the guards finally show up, the cell is covered in blood. Pamela begged for him to call 911. Instead, they would argue and debate whether they were even allowed to take her to a hospital without permission from the U.S. Marshals. Meanwhile, here Pamela's shaking and her blood pressure's dropping. Finally, they had to call it in. They strap her to a stretcher and shackle both her hands and ankles. That's how she spent the rest of her miscarriage, in pain, restrained, and being wheeled out through hallways like she's a threat instead of a woman in crisis. Once she does get to the hospital, they put her in a room, still bound to the bed, with male guards watching over her. Eventually, she's informed by a nurse that she had a miscarriage. The officers later threw away the linens that held her baby's remains. No one told her. No one even let her grieve. Instead, they take her right back to the prison and put her in solitary confinement for 8 months. According to them, it's for medical observation.
The lowest point for me in my life to hear a part of me, my baby, was just thrown in the trash like it was nothing.
And that's when something in her broke. Pamela never wanted to share her story, but the silence was louder than her shame. And it was happening to too many women just like her. So after serving her sentence, 6.5 years, Pamela Wynn decided it was time to speak up, not just for herself, but for every woman who didn't get the chance. She would share her story for the first time on a panel. It wasn't planned, just something she couldn't hold back anymore. And from there, her voice echoed far beyond that room. She went on to help pass the First Step Act in 2018, banning the shackling of pregnant inmates in federal custody. But here's the thing, only 15% of incarcerated women are in federal prisons. So Pamela goes even further. She founded Restore Her, an organization fighting for the rights of incarcerated women, especially those of color. Now in Georgia, she helped pass the HB 345, ending solitary confinement and shackling for pregnant and postpartum women. She also becomes a Soros Justice Fellow and a #Cut50 Dignity Ambassador. and a symbol of what resilience really looks like. Today, she's not just a woman who lost a child in chains. She's a woman making sure no one else has to.
Empathy is knowing that incarcerated people in America are people just like you.
She said, "I'm sorry," and proceeded to clean my private areas while the male sergeant watched.
August 2018, again in Georgia, Jessica Drew Umberger was serving a 5-year sentence when she gave birth to her daughter, Jordan. Now, it was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful, but inside Helms, it became something else entirely. Jessica later tells the U.S. Senate,
I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. They treated us like animals.
And sadly, she wasn't exaggerating. From the moment her pregnancy was confirmed, Jessica was placed in a system that offered little care and even less compassion. She would ask for a natural birth, but her request was denied. Instead, she's forced into a cesarean section, not because of her current health or her baby's needs, but because she had had one nearly 18 years earlier. And she was told it was departmental policy. The delivery came and went. Jessica was then handed her baby, but only briefly. She's allowed 2 hours to hold her daughter, memorize her face, breathe her in, and then Jordan was taken away.
2 short hours to hold and look at my baby. This would be the last time I would see her for a few years, 3 years, about 3.
But her story doesn't end here, and it only gets worse. After giving birth, Jessica's transferred to Lee Arundel State Prison in Habersham County. Her C-section wound was still fresh, still healing, but the conditions of her cell were completely unsanitary, and when she complained, they put her in solitary confinement. According to her, there was no medical care, no clean outfits, and no follow-up for her open surgical wound. She told the Senate,
I was still in the same underwear I gave birth in.
She was left alone in pain for 3 weeks with no medical care, no dressing any kind of wound, and no pain relief. Just a small, filthy cell and an open surgical incision. Her C-section wound became infected.
I didn't know how I was gonna make it. To tell the truth, I didn't think I would make it out of there.
Jessica's story's hard to hear, and it's not rare. 2024, she testifies before a U.S. Senate subcommittee investigating the treatment of pregnant women in U.S. prisons and jails. The investigation, led by Senator John Ossoff, uncovered over 200 documented abuses in just 6 years. These included women giving birth in toilets, in showers, and on dirty cell floors. Some would beg for help that never came. Some would lose their babies waiting for a doctor. Others, like Jessica, lived through it and then came out determined to fight for change. During her testimony, Jessica said,
There was a woman in the room next to mine. She was screaming, help, I'm having my baby. And the nurse on duty just yelled back, shut up, you'll see a doctor in the morning. That woman gave birth on the bathroom floor.
Doctors like Dr. Carolyn Sufrind from Johns Hopkins have called it a national crisis, pointing out that many prisons aren't even tracking how many pregnant women are incarcerated, let alone how to treat them. Dr. Sufrind said,
If we don't count them, people act like they don't exist. And when people believe they don't exist, they're easier to neglect.
Jessica knows exactly what that feels like, being forgotten and dehumanized. But today things are a bit different. She's out, released back in 2022. And now using her voice to speak up, not just for herself, but for all the women still inside. She now works for Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative, PAD, in Atlanta, helping people experiencing poverty and homelessness get the support they need. She would also give credit to groups like Living on Purpose, ATL, and Motherhood Beyond Bars for helping her rebuild her life. Jessica tells the Senate,
There needs to be the same kind of medical care for incarcerated women that any woman on the outside would get. We're still human. We're still mothers.
February 19th, 2006. It's late at night when the contractions hit. Rebecca Figueroa was alone in a transfer cell at Riverhead Correctional Facility in Long Island, screaming in pain, waiting for an ambulance. She was about to give birth to her third child while shackled, bleeding, and terrified no one would reach her in time. She'd already been through 2 labors in her life, but nothing like this. And this time she wasn't just a mother, but an incarcerated woman. And everything about that made the experience feel colder, harsher, and somehow less human. Rebecca's journey into that cell started months earlier. 2006, 23 years old and 2 months pregnant when she's arrested alongside 2 friends after a fight broke out. Now, she wasn't involved in this fight, just sitting in the car, but because of her past record and the accusations thrown her way, she was charged with robbery and acting in concert. Now, she can't afford a private lawyer, so the court gives her one, and because she had co-defendants, her case dragged on while they waited for separate plea deals to clear. So Rebecca sat in jail, pregnant, high risk, and unsure if she would even be free by the time her baby was born. Not only that, but the pregnancy wasn't easy. She had high blood pressure, rapid weight gain, and was at risk for gestational diabetes. In her previous births, her water never broke naturally. She needed medical help to deliver safely. But inside Riverhead, proper care's nearly impossible. The jail diet was mostly bread, pasta, and rice. Fruits and vegetables, rare. The commissary had canned goods, but Rebecca didn't have the money for extras. She tried everything: doctor's notes, legal letters, pleas to the sheriff's office to get better food, but nothing worked. The only help she received was from a very kind female CO who occasionally smuggled in some salad from the staff kitchen. Otherwise, Rebecca was left to fend for herself. Every week, she's taken to see her obstetrician, but those hospital visits come with their own kind of trauma. She's transported by sheriff's deputies, not the COs she saw daily. These guys are cold, sometimes aggressive, and insist on being called deputy, not officer. They make it clear that she is a prisoner first, a pregnant woman second. And then, one freezing night in February, the pain hits her, and she's bleeding before she can even make it to the hospital. Once there, deputies shackle her feet to the bed and handcuff one wrist. She begs him to let her go, telling him,
"Where do you think I'm gonna run?"
Eventually, a doctor ordered the handcuff removed, but they kept the leg shackle on. Even as she pushed, even as she screamed in pain, she gave birth to Kayla, her 3rd child. But instead of placing that baby on her chest, the nurses take her away immediately, without explanation. Rebecca tried to get up, but she can't. She's shackled, panicking, and now crying. No one's telling her what tests are being run, and no one's really bothering to explain anything. And she hadn't even been convicted of a crime. It's a great country. 3 days later, she returned to Riverhead with Kayla, and they're housed in a tiny medical unit set up for 2 mothers and 2 babies. The cribs are made of metal. Rebecca never let her baby sleep in one. She said,
"They looked like little cells."
For 3 months, she stayed in that room. There was a phone and a TV, but not much freedom. To go outside, she had to make a request, and any movement, whether inside the jail or to a court hearing, meant locking down the entire facility as other inmates couldn't be trusted around Kayla. So it was just Rebecca, a stroller with Kayla in it, and a system that barely saw her as a person, let alone a mother. But then when Kayla was almost 4 months old, everything changed. The DA drops the charges. In court, the judge looks at Rebecca and says,
"We apologize."
Rebecca left Riverhead Correctional with a stroller, some supplies, and a spot in the shelter system. She had no home, no real justice. But she had Kayla, and that was everything. Today, Rebecca Figueroa is a proud mom of 7. She's finishing her associates in addiction studies, planning to become a drug abuse counselor for incarcerated and recovering women. She said,
"I want to work with women who don't have a voice, women still stuck in the dark."
December 2019. Tracy Edwards was in labor. It lasted for hours, and through it all, her ankles are shackled, one arm chained to the bed. After the birth, her newborn lay just feet away, crying, and Tracy couldn't reach her. She begged, through tears, through pain.
"Please, just let me hold her."
The officer refused. Tracy was 35 and pregnant when she was sent to North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women on drug charges related to an opioid addiction. Now, she battled that addiction for years, and like many others caught in that opioid crisis, she's trying to survive in a system that often punishes more than it helps. That December, she's taken to UNC hospitals to give birth, but what happened during her stay would haunt her long after she walked out of prison. Despite a 2018 state policy prohibiting restraints during labor, unless the prisoner poses an immediate threat, Tracy was shackled through almost every step of her delivery, during transport, during induced labor, and even during the postpartum moments when she just wanted to hold her baby. Later, she said,
I felt like a tied-up dog. No one, not even an animal, should be treated like that.
And the trauma wouldn't end after delivery. Throughout her pregnancy, Tracy had been prescribed Subutex, a medication used to treat opioid use disorder and prevent withdrawal, which can be harmful to both the mother and the fetus. But after giving birth, her treatment was abruptly stopped. She was tapered off over just 9 days, a decision that violated medical best practices and left her in intense pain. She described the symptoms, saying,
You feel like your skin's crawling, like bugs are moving under it.
She was healing from childbirth, experiencing hormonal changes, and on top of that, she's going through withdrawal. No woman should have to endure any of this all at once. And that's why Tracy decided to file a federal lawsuit, not just for herself, but for all the women who had been through that same thing. Her attorneys described her treatment as very cruel and degrading, arguing that this wasn't an isolated case, but a very sick pattern across North Carolina prisons. 2021, North Carolina passed a law to limit the shackling of pregnant people in jails and prisons. But Tracy's lawyers aren't sure the law would have changed anything for her, as policies don't mean much if people enforcing them ignore them anyway. Now, Tracy's home, raising her daughter alongside her mother. The lawsuit is ongoing, and she's trying to move forward, but memories are really hard to shake on this one. It's not just about justice for herself. She wants people to understand what really happens behind bars, saying,
I just want everyone to realize what happened to me, and what they did was not right.
It's February 13th, 2018, and 19-year-old Tiana LaBoy had been begging for help for days. Now, she's in York Correctional Institution in Connecticut, sitting in this mental health unit, awaiting trial, pregnant, in pain, and totally being ignored. Now, she's not asking for any special treatment, just to be seen, maybe heard, and given basic medical care. Apparently, she was asking for too much. Tiana ends up giving birth alone in her cell's toilet. Her daughter, known as Baby N in court records, entered the world in a prison's bathroom with no doctors, no nurses, and no blankets to keep her warm. Just her mother's cellmate by her side, a bunkie, who helped with that delivery and got a few days shaved off her sentence in return. And this was just the beginning. Tiana's story is not only about what happened this night, but everything that came before it and everything the state tried to take after. She had been placed in the prison's mental health unit, diagnosed with bipolar disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. Tiana had a history of trauma and self-harm. Her mother remembers school officials calling her to pick Tiana up after finding her stabbing herself with a pencil at just 7 years old. Now, she had cried out for help her whole life, but when she cried out from her cell, pregnant and bleeding, no one came. Not until she's standing in a pool of blood holding her newborn did COs finally act. The internal investigation provided evidence of neglect that Tiana would later use in a lawsuit. Her repeated pleas for medical attention were ignored. The prison had no medical staff on call for evenings or even weekend births. Staff falsified records to cover up what happened, and most importantly, York Correctional's own policy stated,
Babies should not be born at York.
Yet Baby N was. So Tiana later files a civil rights lawsuit against the DOC, the prison OBGYN, and multiple officers and medical staff. I mean, she has every right to seek justice. But in Connecticut, there's a catch. Now, thanks to the state's pay-to-stay law, the harshest in the country, any money she might win in court could be seized to pay back the cost of her incarceration. That's $249 a day, over $500,000 in total by the state's estimate. So Tiana had a choice. I guess fight for justice and possibly walk away with nothing, or settle quietly. What's she gonna do? She settles. Her daughter, Baby N, is later diagnosed with autism and developmental delays. Like, she now lives with her grandmother, Karen, who didn't even learn about the birth until 33 hours later. Karen later said in this interview with Connecticut Post,
I would say it could have been your daughter. She should have been in a hospital bed, not a prison cell.
Tiana never denied that what she did was serious. I mean, she stabbed a man, and it was a violent assault. But maybe what she truly needed wasn't punishment that would leave a lifelong scar on both her and her child. Maybe what she needed was real mental health support and proper prenatal care. But she's still behind bars, serving a 7-year sentence. Meanwhile, her daughter, born in trauma, continues to grow up away from her mother, carrying a story no child should have to. October 16th, 2021. Ashley Caswell had been in labor for 12 hours. Her water had broken. She was bleeding and terrified. No one would help her. She would plead again and again to be taken to a hospital. She knew something was wrong, but according to a lawsuit filed later, jail staff told her to deal with the pain and instructed her to lie down. She wasn't given a hospital bed or even a proper medical unit. She's inside Etowah County Jail, locked up under Alabama's chemical endangerment laws, a set of charges often used against pregnant women who allegedly used drugs during pregnancy, and she was about to give birth in a shower. Ashley's pregnancy was already considered high risk. She had hypertension, mental health diagnoses, and was in her late 30s. According to the lawsuit, she was denied access to her psychiatric medication, weekly prenatal appointments, and even basic needs, like a bed. She slept on a thin mat on a concrete floor for months. By the time her water broke that October morning, 3 days before her scheduled induction, she was in agony. But instead of being rushed to the ER, she was given Tylenol. And instead of being shown any human decency, she's told to stop screaming. Can't make this up. What she's experiencing now is placental abruption, a serious and potentially deadly condition where the placenta detaches from the uterus. This causes massive blood loss and risks the lives of both mother and baby. At around 6 p.m., staff finally escorted her, bleeding and in full-blown labor, to the shower area. And just like that, poor Ashley gives birth on a cold concrete floor, alone, upright, and in excruciating pain. We repeat, nobody provided her with any medical help, pain relief, or even basic support. And then she passed out. One was left alone during childbirth. Another experienced a stillbirth after being taken to a hospital 5 days after her water broke. These women are charged under Alabama's chemical endangerment laws, originally intended to stop meth labs. But over the years, they've been used to criminalize pregnancy itself, because that's the point we've reached now in humanity, especially for those struggling with addiction, poverty, or mental illness. According to a pregnancy justice report, Alabama accounts for nearly half of all pregnancy-related arrests in the U.S. from 2006 to 2022, and Etowah County is known as the epicenter. Ashley Caswell is now serving a 15-year sentence for felony endangerment in Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. Her lawsuit, filed in federal court, seeks justice. Again, not just for her, but for all these women failed by a system that claims to protect unborn life, while endangering the lives of the women actually carrying them. In her own words, she said,
"Giving birth to my son without any medical help in the jail shower was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. My body was falling apart and no one would listen to me. No one cared. I thought I would lose my baby, my life, and never see my other kids again. Bottom line is, no one should have to give birth like this, and no one should be punished for needing help."
Now we arrive at November 2022. Jenny Jones was 7.5 months pregnant on a bed rest when she was arrested on an old DUI charge and then taken from Missouri to Tennessee. It didn't matter that her doctor had flagged her as a high-risk pregnancy. It didn't matter that she had just started prescribed rest. She's booked into Loudoun County Jail, and from the moment she steps in, looks like no one really cares she's carrying a child. She tells them that the pregnancy's complicated, and she was asking for medical help when the symptoms began. But what she got instead was a guard telling her to
"Sit your ass down."
That was just the beginning. Not long after being jailed, Jenny started experiencing early labor symptoms. She began vomiting and doubled over in pain. When she did ask for help, one of the guards reportedly called her a sick bitch and told her to clean up the mess herself. She tried again and then again, but no one seemed to care. For 2 to 3 hours, Jenny kept asking for medical attention. There was nothing. Finally, she was allowed to use the bathroom, and then she realized what was happening. She could feel the baby's head, and she was bleeding. Panicked, she does the only thing that she can think of, grabs a piece of bloody toilet paper and holds it up to the security camera. The officer watching responded,
"You're a pain in my ass."
They still didn't call for help though. Instead, Jenny was handed a dirty blanket and left on the bathroom floor, alone, until her water broke. Only then, hours later, was an ambulance finally called. By the time Jenny made it to the ambulance, it's too late. She gives birth in the back of it, unable to make it to the hospital in time. And according to the lawsuit, if she'd received medical care earlier, doctors may have been able to stop the premature labor and allow the pregnancy to continue to full term. But because of that delay, her daughter's born earlier, and now she has some complications. The baby's later diagnosed with complete deafness in one ear and only 30% hearing in the other. And the trauma doesn't end here. After giving birth, Jenny wasn't allowed to bond with her daughter. A male officer remained in her hospital room the entire time, and 18 hours later, she's taken back to jail. I mean, she wasn't given any accommodations or even allowed to pump breast milk. She had just given birth, the miracle of life, and is treated like none of it matters. Soon after, Jenny's quietly released on her own recognizance. 2020, Tennessee passes a law requiring all jails and prisons to provide appropriate prenatal and postnatal care. It was supposed to be to protect women like Jenny, but it didn't happen. Senator Ramesh Akbari, the lawmaker behind that bill, says this is exactly the kind of story she fought to prevent, saying,
"It's sad and makes me angry. We're trying to avoid this exact same scenario."
Jenny Jones had sued Loudoun County and 5 unnamed jail employees. She's asking for damages, coverage for her daughter's future medical expenses, and mandatory training for jail staff. July 14th, 2016. By the time anyone at Milwaukee County Jail noticed Shade Swayzer had given birth alone in her cell, it was too late. Her baby Lila was gone. Shade was 30 years old, nearly 9 months pregnant, and had been brought in after this dispute with a hotel clerk. Now, the charges were disorderly conduct and a parole violation tied to this old burglary conviction. A hospital evaluation confirmed the pregnancy was healthy and full term, and she was cleared for jail. But it looks like things only spiraled from there. Shade had a documented history of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. She tells a jail nurse she had stopped her meds, afraid they might hurt the baby. She refuses further examination but was placed in a special needs unit, which was supposed to include daily checks, but that didn't last. The women's unit is overcrowded, only 3 cells for women versus at least 13 for men. So, just after 48 hours, she's moved to an isolation cell with no video coverage. There, she labored alone. No one noticed, and no one came. At around 6 a.m., an officer doing his rounds finally notices something off. Shade wasn't wearing pants. She's acting strange. Bizarre, the report said. The guard didn't know she was pregnant. That wasn't in her custody notes, so they kept walking. Later, they come back, and they smell something. Blood, or a funk, according to investigation reports. They look closer. Then, finally, they call for help. Poor Shade is laying on her side, still attached to her umbilical cord, cradling the baby in a blanket. There's blood all over the mattress, feces, and old food containers scattered on the floor. She tells him,
"Don't hurt my baby."
but sadly, Lila was already gone. Shade later said that she begged for help, and according to her attorney, she tells an officer her water broke and that she was going into labor, but this officer laughed. She said she gave birth around 4 a.m. and wasn't found until 6 a.m. She also said the baby was born alive, cried, and even breastfed. The sheriff's office claims otherwise, though. They say that she was never in labor and that baby was stillborn. Oh, and the autopsy report to prove it was never released. But here's the thing. Jail staff never noted in her custody record that she was pregnant. She was placed in a cell with no cameras, despite being high risk. And she had a pretty serious known mental illness, had stopped her meds, and was left in isolation. This is sick. Even when they spotted her half naked and acting strangely, no one cared. Even when she sat for hours with blood nearby, couldn't care less. Shade filed a notice of claim seeking $8.5 million and accountability, and she ain't the only one. That same year, 4 people died in the Milwaukee County Jail. One of them, Terrell Thomas, died from dehydration after his water was shut off in solitary. His death was ruled a homicide. Shade's daughter, though, didn't die from violence, but neglect, indifference, I don't know. The line between the two is thinner than one would like to admit. And as you've seen in this video, hers isn't the first case, and sadly, it won't be the last. It's August 2nd, 2022, and for 6 days, Cherry Bird had told jail staff in Onondaga County, New York, that she was in labor. She said her water had broken, and she said the baby's head was already in the birth canal. And for 6 days, no one did anything. That morning, she gives birth in her cell. Her daughter, Ayanna, died less than an hour later. Just a month earlier, though, on July 1st, Cherry had been arrested for petite larceny, a non-violent misdemeanor, and booked into Onondaga County Justice Center on a $5,000 bail. She can't afford it, so she stays behind bars. This poor girl is 35 years old and visibly pregnant. She also has mental disabilities and psychosis, something the jail knew from day one. And according to her lawyers, that alone should have made her a medical priority. But our reality is a lot different. You see, Cherry was barely seen and never even completed a medical intake screening. Even though she was exhibiting clear signs of delusional behavior, she didn't receive a full psychiatric evaluation, nor even a dose of medication until 12 days after she arrived. Then on July 27th, she tells the staff her water had broken. A nurse would check on her and see a $50 wet patch on the sheet. But she doesn't notify the on-call doctor. Oh, there's no follow-up, no test, and no transfer. And over the next 6 days, this poor woman kept pleading, saying that she was in labor, saying that her baby was coming, but staff ignored her, claiming that she didn't appear to be in discomfort. And because she had this mental illness, they assumed that she couldn't be trusted about her own body. Again, can't make it up. And so, instead of urgent care, they give her some Tylenol. In the early hours of August 2nd, Cherry was finally taken to the hospital, only after she told a deputy that she was bleeding and giving birth. And by then, it's far too late. Her daughter, Ayanna Bird, died less than an hour later. She's born prematurely and wasn't given any immediate medical attention. A report by the New York State Commission of Correction later found that Cherry's medical care had been deficient and negligent. It also talked about a number of failures. There was no timely medical screening, no urgent psychiatric care, no response to repeated labor complaints, no communication with physicians, and no hospital transfer, even when clear signs of labor were present, and perhaps most painfully, a possible case of bias. The report questioned whether Cherry was ignored not just because she was incarcerated, but because she's mentally ill. You see, at the time, the medical care at the jail was provided by NAFCare and Proactive Healthcare Medicine, both of which now are facing multiple lawsuits, including one from Cherry and her family. The county has since changed providers, but this wouldn't be the first time NAFCare was criticized by the state. One inmate, Kevin Galuli, died in 2021 from untreated heart conditions. Another, Angela Peng, took her own life while withdrawing from fentanyl. Neither case received proper attention nor care in time. And well, neither did Ayanna.
The system is cruel and will never be a safe place to have a baby.
September 27th, 2019. The film Killer Joe was playing on the TV in Rihanna Cleary's prison cell. She remembers a disturbing scene with a chicken leg. Then nothing. She passed out on the floor, alone, in labor, just 18 years old, when officers finally entered her cell at HMP Bronzefield in Ashford, England, more than 12 hours after she first pressed that buzzer for help. It was too late. There's blood everywhere. On the bed, the sink, the walls, and her daughter Aisha was wrapped in a towel, motionless. Rihanna had delivered her daughter by herself, with no one there to help, and she had bitten through her own umbilical cord.
Prison officers do not always follow policy. Look what happened to me when I pressed my cell bell twice. Nobody came.
The guards tried resuscitating Aisha, but there are no neonatal masks, only adult ones that didn't fit her tiny face. Aisha's pronounced dead at 9:03 a.m. Rihanna's story makes headlines when it breaks. And not just because of what had happened, but how many systems had failed her along the way. Her childhood was marked by instability. Her mother battled addiction. Her grandmother, who had been her rock, passed away when she was 14, and her father was later incarcerated. Rihanna bounced between foster care homes and secure units, and by the time she's 17, she's homeless and frequently arrested, often seen as a delinquent and rarely as someone needing protection. February 2019, she finds out that she's pregnant while being held in police custody, and by the time she arrives at Bronzefield, she's hoping prison might offer some stability. maybe even some support. But she's met with suspicion instead. Social workers already call her a high risk and tell her that she'd likely have her baby taken away at birth. One officer reportedly told her that she would get just 5 minutes with her baby before the police stepped in. She later said in a written statement,
I felt like nobody was trying to understand me. It felt like they had already decided I couldn't be a mother, like I didn't even get a chance.
On the day of the birth, Rihanna was in pain. She presses her cell buzzer at 8:07. Begging for a nurse or an ambulance. The officer is asking why, but she can't explain through her contractions, and the call wasn't followed up. She buzzes again 25 minutes later, but no one's coming. By the time the night officer passed by hours later, Rihanna's now on all fours, clearly in distress. The officer glances in with a flashlight and walks away. Sometime after 1:40 a.m., Rihanna passed out. She delivered Aisha alone in the night, trying to wipe away the blood, trying to keep her baby warm, and just waited. But no one realized what had happened until 8:30 a.m., when officers finally unlock her cell. The inquest that followed took almost 4 years. 50 witnesses gave evidence, and the coroner found systematic failings by nearly every agency involved. From the prison itself to the NHS midwifery service, there had been no plan in place to transfer this poor woman to a hospital for delivery. No clear chain of communication, and multiple warnings had been ignored. One officer had written,
The risk of giving birth in cell increases by the week.
Another professional had warned,
Tonight could be the night we get caught out.
They weren't wrong. Rihanna sat through every day of that month-long inquest. Now 22, she's listening quietly as others dissect the most traumatic night of her life. One officer, just one, offered her condolences in court. The rest of them, empty apologies. The Ministry of Justice, Sodexo, the private company that runs Bronzefield, and the NHS Trust all released statements expressing regret. Now, they promised reforms, better antenatal care, more welfare checks, specialist staff in every women's prison. Yeah, for Rihanna, it was kind of too late for that. She said in her statement,
What happened in that cell was the worst and most terrifying and degrading experience of my life.
I have lost Aisha forever. So the most important thing is that no pregnant women ever go through what I did again.
But sadly, pregnant women still struggle in prison. In recent years, many women at HMP Bronzefield and HMP Peterborough have come forward with similar accounts. Some say they were forced to give birth in handcuffs, restrained during intimate exams, or even left in rooms with male guards while in labor. 5 women are now suing the UK government, saying their rights were violated and that the Ministry of Justice policies were ignored. One woman, a domestic abuse survivor, described being handcuffed to a male officer overnight while laboring in just a hospital gown. She said,
I cried and begged them to remove the handcuffs. I didn't want to expose my body in front of officers, but I didn't have the energy to argue.
These women were not threats. Many were just on remand, not even convicted of a crime. Some would later walk free without a custodial sentence, but their time inside had already left permanent scars.